Hi, and welcome to another Trustcast Show. And we're excited to have with us Anthony McClaren. Hi, Anthony. Welcome to the show.
Nice to be here. Thanks, Zane.
So, Anthony, after his father died of Parkinson's at age 59, today's guest climbed the highest mountain on every continent in just over 2 years, including Everest, with almost no support and on a shoestring budget. And by day, Anthony is an LA trial attorney who collects the money that other lawyers can't. And we'll get into what that means in a minute. So, your dad passed away from Parkinson's, and less than a year later, you were standing on top of Kilimanjaro.
That's correct.
What was going through your head on that day?
Well, up to that point, he died 10 years ago on December 1st. He passed away, so December 1st of 16. And I was on the summit of Kilimanjaro like 24 November of 17. And after he died and I buried him, decided I wanted to do something to honor him, to bring awareness to the condition, to also honor the U.S. military, of which he served proudly for 20 years, as well as his dad. And so I came up with this, I'm going to do the 7 summits. I was aware of what the 7 summits was. I thought that would be really hard. I had no idea how I was going to do it, but I just said, you know what, I'm going to do that. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it. And so up to that Kilimanjaro climb, most of what I was doing was planning associated with all of the mountains. So I came up with a game plan about when I would go, because the mountains tend to be more accommodating, if you want to use that word, during certain times. And so I built that plan out, and once I had that plan, I kind of executed on the first mountain, which was Kilimanjaro. I sourced local help there. You have to in Tanzania. They require you have support. You don't need, in my opinion, you don't need support to climb Kilimanjaro. It's just a very, very high trek. But they require you to have support, so I had already sourced all of those things, and I flew LA to LA in 9 days. So I left Los Angeles, I landed in Moshi, I started climbing the mountain the next day, I summited the next day, I came down the next day, so I was 53 hours car to car off the mountain, and then I spent a couple of days hanging out in Africa, and then I came back. So I was in and out of Africa to the top of the mountain in 9 days, and 3 weeks later I left for the next mountain. So I think it's important to note that for me, I never really, reflected on the accomplishment of each mountain, because it was all about the 7 or it didn't matter. And that was critical. 7 summits or it didn't matter. Only after, having done all of them now can I reflect back on all of the wonderful experiences that I, got to enjoy. Just, going to the different countries, meeting the different people, obviously climbing the mountain, all the stress and everything like that. So anyway, long-winded answer. That's what it felt like when I was on the summit of Kili in November of 17.
So, this is an expensive. So you did it on a shoestring budget. Of course, a shoestring budget just to get around to all those 7 mountains
Yep.
is fairly expensive. And then you've got I know on Everest, I don't know about all the other mountains, but I know on Everest you have to have guides, and you have to. There's a lot of equipment involved with just doing the trek. Is that right?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been climbing mountains up in 17. I'd already been climbing mountains for about 14 years, so I was already pretty well equipped with all of the different gear that you need. Most of it's just cold weather gear. These mountains aren't super technical. I'm a technical climber, so I already owned all of those things anyway. So I had already, as a hobby, collected most of the things that you would need. You need to get really good clothing, really good tents, because like I said, I did it on my own more or less. I would say the whole thing cost me 120 grand, which I didn't have. I cashed out my 401k. I borrowed money. I did some fundraising and donated to Parkinson's, charities, but also used some of those monies to help me. But the whole thing cost me 120 grand, and I can tell you, I once did the math. Like Africa cost me maybe 3,500. That was the cost of the plane ticket, the cost of the services that you use. South America maybe cost me $2,000. Because I soloed it, because you can solo down in South America. So all I had to do was get a plane ticket and a few nights in a hotel when I was done. Denali in Alaska, now McKinley Denali, that maybe cost me $1,500. And each of those three mountains that I just said, if you hire a traditional service provider, Africa can cost you 10 grand, South America can cost you 10 to 15, Denali can cost you 10 to 15 to 20, because Denali is a bit of a much harder mountain. So anyway, I did those three in kind of in that order, at that price, at that cost point. Then I went to Russia, climbed that one, highest mountain in Europe, which was a very wild experience. Followed it. I did connect with some crazy Russian guys to climb with, but that one cost me maybe 3 grand. So up to those 4 mountains, it didn't cost much. It's the last 3 where you're going to put in money. The highest mountain in Australia is actually in Indonesia. So you have to get to Bali, and then you have to fly from Bali to this remote island, and then you have to go up that. And because of geopolitical events that are happening on Western Papua, you use a helicopter to get to the base, and so the cost starts to go up. But I minimized all of that by sourcing locally. I didn't use Western services. You can get them out of the UK, you can get them out of the US, you can get them out of New Zealand. I sourced locally, and I was able to save 10, 15 grand on the Australian continent. And then Everest cost me about 40 grand, but that's about as inexpensive as it gets. I used just logistical support and one Sherpa, which allowed me, and this gets kind of a lot deeper into that mountain, but it allowed me to make a lot more of the decisions about when to climb. I was on that mountain in 2019 when that photo went around the world with all those people queued up, and something like 15 people died that year. I was already off the mountain and safe back in Kathmandu, and that's because I led it in a sense. I mean, my Sherpa had summited Everest twice. He was stronger than me. I definitely, he led the physicality of it, but I was the one able to make the shots. And then when you go down to Antarctica, kind of a cherry on top of the whole thing, you pay a fortune to go to Antarctica because you got to fly over the Drake Passage. It's just, it is a spendy endeavor, but I was able to do all of them, like I said, for about $120,000, and it broke me. I started from zero after it was done, but I was okay with that because I believed in me and I believed in the endeavor and all of the things, and I knew I had I was strong enough. I did not have children. Now I do. My parents had passed. I wasn't married, so I was able to, I was able to just do it, and I knew that my life would not ever be the same, and that was the time, and so I did. I just cashed out everything, went for broke.
So it says here you raised $40,000 for Parkinson's research through Climb Above Parkinson's. What does that nonprofit look like today?
Oh, I've concluded it. This was a snapshot of something I was really trying to do in my life. I ended up folding that into a national organization. They took over its assets. I funded what was remaining in the operating account. But when it was active, I was funding Keck School of Medicine over here in Southern California at USC. And I would, the nonprofit would write them checks for their research, and that was really great. I haven't thought about that in a few years, but that's where the money was going, was directly to help them fund their efforts, and it really felt good to help them.
So you were your father's primary caregiver for the last 3 years of his life. What did that teach you about yourself?
Hmm. Well, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is I hope that I don't ever have to be in that position. I hope, as I think everyone does, that I live a nice, long, meaningful life, and then, the lights go out pretty quickly. That's not the experience my father had, unfortunately, and it was sad because he was only 59, and other than his Parkinson's, which is a monster, he was in great health. He had no heart disease, he had no lung issues, he was a very strong man, and, I'm 48. I'll be 50 soon. My dad was showing signs of Parkinson's by the time he was 50, maybe a bit before. And then he was officially diagnosed. He was 52. And then it was just a, slow moving disaster. So caring for him the last 3 years of his life was difficult. I mean, I had him in a place that they cared for him on a day to day, but I was the one going there and being with him and helping him out. And I did things like cut his nails, give him a haircut, shave him. And those were very warm, intimate moments with my father that, was very touching. And it was just sad. like to reflect on myself. It's why my entire approach in life has been about maintaining a strong, being strong physically. It also is good for your brain just to stay strong physically. There's just so many benefits. This time tested, stay on top of your nutrition, stay on top of your fitness, mind your drinking and things like that. And so, if anything, my father's demise from this neurological disease just, reminded me of the importance of how I've been going about my life to have a nice, long, meaningful life.
So you wrote a book about the journey called Seven Summits for Dad. Was it harder climbing the mountains or writing about why you did it?
It was definitely harder to climb the mountains than write the book. I was able to write the book I mean, it was COVID. Like it was the 4 to 6 months, depending on where you lived. In California, it was those months where we were just stuck, So I had the ability to really focus on it. I wrote it. I had someone help me edit it, and then I had someone help me publish it. And those things were relatively straightforward. I've actually taken that book out of circulation because I reflect on how I sound in it. I don't like the way I sound, so I've rewritten it in the sense of being a lawyer, which, is basically what I do is I tell people's stories. So if you have a legal problem, whatever your legal problem is, I take it and then I present it back to a judge or a jury or to some audience. And I'm very good at that. I'm also very good at writing that way. I understand how to be descriptive in the third person. And so I took my book and I restructured it. That took me about a year to restructure the book that I wrote from first person to third person. And I've actually, last month, I submitted that to a different company to help me check it for punctuation, grammar errors, things like that. And I'm on the other side of that. And so I will be now looking for someone to help me publish that, or I'll self-publish it. But that rewriting it, that was an endeavor.
Yeah.
That was an endeavor.
So I do a good bit of ghostwriting too. So I know about writing books. So it's this section here says collecting the uncollectible. Most people don't know that winning a lawsuit and actually getting paid are two completely different things. Explain what happens after a business wins this judgment and everybody thinks, oh, this is great. Then what happens?
Yeah, I mean, what you want to happen is that the opponent writes you a check, and then it's done, and you move on with your life. But what I help companies and law firms do for their clients is they've obtained this very hard-fought success, whether they went all the way to a trial in front of a jury or a judge, or they went to an arbitrator and obtained an arbitration award. There's a lot involved with that. We do that here as well. We do that kind of before the judgment aspect of things. So I'm very familiar with what is involved. It's very expensive. It's very stressful. And you end up with the victory. You have this piece of paper that says that you are now entitled to this money. And then they just don't pay. And that's where you need specialized counsel. So whether it's the company that has the judgment that they somehow obtained on their own, or whether it's the law firm that obtained the judgment for the client, and now they're like, look, we don't want to try and figure this aspect out for you. We recommend specialized counsel, and so that's who we help. We also help banks who end up with judgments against, things on their books and, assets that they're trying to collect. And so we end up obtaining the judgment. We do a peek into who we're going after to see if there's anything meaningful in that moment. And if we reveal bank accounts, brokerage accounts, real estate, meaningful personal property like boats or expensive cars and things like that, or trusts, then we advise the client, okay, let's do this now to go secure your assets. And that is essentially the process. And very sophisticated, they're called judgment debtors. That's the defendant that's now become a judgment debtor because they have a judgment against them. If they're sophisticated, if they have money, tends to go hand in hand. If you're sophisticated, you do a lot of things to make my job harder. And what you're doing is making my client really think through how going forward will look for them, because obviously they're paying me to get them to continue to get this judgment. So when we have that judgment and we find assets, hopefully we secure their judgment, and then that's the end of it. The other thing that can happen, and we're often looking for, is to put enough pressure on the judgment debtor, whether it's an individual or a company or both, to say, look, I don't want to fight this anymore. I owe $1 million to your client. Let's talk turkey. I don't want to deal with this anymore. What will your client accept as a compromise on this $1 million judgment? And business people tend to be business minded, and then, because they look at the economics of continuing to pay me to get a result versus they've offered, $500,000 on that million. And the client says, that's a little bit low. What can we do better? Just using kind of really simple, hypothetical. Anyway, so it's about putting pressure on the other side to either have them step up and pay their judgment or to secure their assets. And that's what we do. And we've been doing it at this firm for almost 50 years.
Wow. So do you do seizures?
Yes.
Is that one of the methods you use?
Yes. So we can record an abstract of judgment against a piece of real property. We can use the sheriff to seize boats and cars. That's a little bit more involved, and you want to have those things you want them to be very high value for that to make economic sense.
Yep.
And then we seize, to use that word, or levy, bank accounts and brokerage accounts. We know in this Bank of America account ending in 1234 that there's $600,000. We're going to levy that, and we use either the sheriff's department around here, it's the LA sheriff, other sheriff's department, or if it's a federal case, we use the U.S. Marshal Service to accomplish the same objective. We serve the bank, and then the bank is on notice, and the other side they have to pay that money out unless the other side requests an exemption, which they do, and sometimes they have legitimate exemptions, but a lot of times they don't. And so that's how we seize assets.
So the name of your law firm is Ronald P. Slates. Are you a principal in that firm as well?
I'm an income partner here. I joined Ron's firm about a year ago, maybe a little less than that. So I wound down my law practice, which was business litigation, which is, like I said, the pre-judgment aspect of things, as well as employment law. And employment law in California is very challenging, very saturated market. I wanted to,
It's stacked. It's stacked. I mean, I've been the employer, and in California, it was just very interesting.
Well, you are not. It's not a level playing field for the employer, because if you get someone who makes a claim against you with an attorney, that if there's a hint of blood in the water, it's an economic decision for you to pay blood money or pay me a lot to get you to the finish line, and you have no remedy against them. So it's not fair-sided, and I'm digressing, but that's the reason why, after doing that for 20 years and the birth of my son, I decided that if I was going to make a move and get into a different area of law, that the timing was now. Because as my son aged and as other children that we have coming age, I would not feel comfortable being that insecure financially. In other words, I would need the paycheck. I would need the security. And so I would have continued to continue practicing employment law, even though I wasn't happy doing it. And so I took the chance. I reached out to a few different people in my circle, and then eventually connected with Ron. I'd known him for about 10 years. And I'd done some judgment enforcement work in my practice, so it wasn't completely foreign territory to me. But yeah, so now I've been here for a year, but he's the guy. If you run a chat search on, judgment enforcement in California, chat, GPT, chat, which is a really wonderful tool. It populates his name. And the reason why is because he's been around for so long. So just imagine that if you're somebody, to quote from The Jerk, I'm somebody. You're somebody if your name populates in chat. And so that's because Ron is the guy that does judgment enforcement.
So you're a trial attorney. I mean, you've been a trial attorney. So is that something you're still doing with with Ron's firm, or
Yes.
or are you pretty much focused on, you're still doing the trial attorney?
Yeah.
So what kinds of,
So you in judgment enforcement, you're not. There are evidentiary proceedings, but
Mhm.
it's not as adversarial. It still is. I mean, you're still dealing with adversaries who don't want to pay, but you are not. There's no longer a question of liability. You're on the other side of that equation. But to your question, when I am hired by a company because of a dispute, non-payment, for example, of invoices, some other sort of a breach of contract agreement, garden variety, what I call business torts, that is standard litigation. File a lawsuit, maybe they file a cross complaint or a counter complaint against you, and you litigate those things and you duke them out, and if you have to, you go all the way to trial to win. Usually, business people don't want to, incur those legal fees unless you're talking about exceptional amounts of money. It's just the cost of doing business. So oftentimes you can get reasonable-minded business people to come to a compromise. But yes, I'm still litigating and going to trial, taking depositions, doing arbitrations, doing trials in the business litigation world.
okay. Okay, no, I'm going to skip over the rapid fire. So, walk me through what a debtor exam looks like. You said you thrive in them.
Well, so you have to get the court to issue a notice to the judgment debtor of their examination. They actually come, so it's unique compared to a deposition, which is it's kind of like a deposition, but it's there are similarities, but there are definitely differences. In a deposition, you notice the deposition of the deponent. They show up at usually these days via Zoom, but it used to be they show up to a location. There's a court reporter present, and you ask them questions under oath. That is similar in doing a debtor exam in the sense that they have to show up and you ask them questions under oath and you get a court reporter to make a transcript of that. But that is where the similarities end because the location is court versus a private room somewhere. And you have the judge on my side. So if the other side is being obstructionist or challenging, I can use the judge to force them to participate, to do things. And so that is a huge difference and a very helpful aspect of doing a judgment debtor exam. The other thing that's kind of odd about it is you do it at the court, but you don't do it in the courtroom. They don't go sit at the witness stand and answer your questions. You take them oftentimes to the lunchroom where a bunch of other people are milling about and you ask them your questions, and some courts have a little bit more of a private area that you can take someone, but I always find it just, kind of, it's just, if I was the one receiving the questions, it would make me uncomfortable. But anyway, so you go to a common area at the court, and you sit down and you ask them questions about their assets, their bank accounts, their transactions. You demand sometimes 50 different document requests to them that they hopefully show up with, and if they don't, again, you can use the judge to force them to come back. Another thing that's unique about judgment debtor exam, if they fail to show up, the court can issue a bench warrant. And so now you have a bench warrant against you so that if you get pulled over, the police officer or sheriff's deputy says, yeah, you got a warrant, buddy. And then, they can
get in the back.
They can put you in jail. I mean, that's a possibility. The cops are very busy with other more meaningful crimes, but it's still, it's still something to make that person take it very seriously. And so, kind of broad overview, that's the judgment debtor exam experience. It's not uncommon that they show up and they've either conveniently not shown up with what they were asked to show up with, or they otherwise are evasive, and then you get the judge to order them to return, within 3 weeks until you get you can take them. You can take as many as you need as long as you're not asking duplicative questions.
I would think that would just frustrate the hell out of you as well as the judge, does it?
Yeah, well, you want it to upset the judge because he's on your team,
Yeah.
So it's in the debtor's best interest to not do that. Does it frustrate me? Not really. It's just, it only would frustrate me if my client was frustrated. And I understand that because they're paying me a lot of money to get them an end result. But as a good attorney, you think through and advise your client of the possibilities of things. So that way, if the debtor was, a stinker and, was being obstructionist or evasive and things like that, the client's already been made aware. And usually they did business with this person before. So they're aware of their personality. They're aware
Right.
of their, kind of underhanded tactics and, that kind of thing. And so maybe they're not offended, but does it bother me? Not really. I'm doing my job, and I'm gonna continue to do my job until you either secure my client's judgment or you negotiate a resolution with that problem.
So are all attorneys aware that, that I guess they are, but it's to me, this is a new thing. And I guess it would be new to most people who think, well, we got the judgment, so that's the end of it. So attorneys, I mean, how often do you have to go to the process of actually collecting on a judgment versus people who just pay?
That's probably a question that's better suited for a law firm that obtains a number of judgments so that you could actually get a percentage of statistics. Obviously, there's enough of them that don't happen that allow me to have a law practice. And it's another thing about why it was appealing to me and why I moved away from employment law, because it's the opposite of a saturated market. It's very niche. There are not many people who do it. And it's a very cordial community of lawyers. We all know we're competing for the same business, but it's very accommodating. We are not adverse to each other. It's not a cutthroat market, and so that's what makes it appealing to me, is that it's niche, and that means that when those events happen, and to your question, they happen frequently enough, that there's plenty of that to go around and come to me to help those clients secure their victories.
So when somebody calls you, a lot of your clients come from other lawyers who've won the case but can't collect. What do you tell them on that first call? How does that go?
Yeah, so we either get word of mouth referral or repeat customers, law firms. Also, people run searches, companies run searches. They have a judgment, and then they found us, and we are reputed to be the best in the business because we are. When they
I love it.
contact me, the conversation predictably goes, we recommend that you obtain an asset search first. We have an outside vendor that we've been using for decades, top notch, and they will conduct an asset search and tell us what, if anything, ABC Company or Bill Steck with ABC Company, depending on if he was named as an individual debtor or not in the judgment, what assets do they have? So let's do that first. It's generally a low cost commitment on the part of you as the client to take a peek, to see what exists. And, I spoke on it earlier in this conversation. Once we get that report, then we come up with a strategy about how to proceed on that. And that, once we get the report, it dictates whether we're going to move. Of course, if it doesn't come back roses, we can say, don't worry, your judgment's basically enforceable in perpetuity. So you can revisit this in 6 months, in 2 years, things like that, because the judgment can always be satisfied. But if we hit pay dirt and it's a bank account, then we go levy the bank account. Brokerage account, levy the brokerage account. Real property, if it's in the name of Bill Steck as my example, or the ABC Company, we go and we record an abstract of judgment and then do a foreclosure if appropriate on that property. Another tool that we have is to get an assignment order. So if we can show that ABC Company receives licensing fees from XYZ Company, and that's the primary source of their revenue, we can have the court order that those revenues be given to us and not to ABC Company. And of course, that's a noticed motion, and the ABC Company has the right and the ability to oppose it on various grounds, but that is just another arrow in our quiver to secure our clients' judgments against assets of the debtor.
I think that would be a really strong one, because if you're a company, the last thing you want is your customers knowing you're in this situation. So
Right.
is that accurate?
Are you talking about the debtor?
Yeah. Yeah. So the debtor, if they're doing business with other people,
Yeah,
and then you're gonna
sure.
basically take
Yeah.
that
Yeah, I
then
mean,
you
the practical aspect of it is yes, that those monies are directed to us, and the optics of that cannot be good if you're the ABC company and then one of the people that you're doing business with gets wind of the fact that you've, whatever, right? If you lost a lawsuit, it happens. People in business understand that, but if they start to get wind of the fact that you are, you know, a deadbeat,
welching.
that you're watching a real man honors his debts, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's
If they
not
get
good.
that, if they get that impression of you, well, that could impact your business, and so you want to avoid that. And call Anthony and say, look, let's figure this out. Let me satisfy this judgment to your client so that I don't have to deal with this headache and ruin business.
So you're a father, a climber, a lawyer, a nonprofit founder, an author, motivational speaker. We didn't even talk about that. What do you have to give up to do all that stuff?
Uh, of social life, I guess. That's probably the only thing that's there. I mean, I very much value my sleep. I try and get as much as I can. I value my time with my children, my wife. The thing that has changed is, I mean, so I'm not climbing right now, and that's because I have a young child, and frankly, probably another one on the way. And I remember my climbing partners over the years, when they became fathers, they were off the
Mhm.
grid. I didn't see them
Yeah,
for a
yeah.
couple years, and it makes sense. It's just like you don't have the time. It's not that there's anything about what I do that's any more dangerous than riding a car if you know what you're doing, but it's just the time commitment associated with actual going out and rock climbing or mountain climbing. I just don't have the time, and so I've put that on the shelf for now, as well as I used to. Yeah, when my wife and I were just married or single but dating, like we went out a lot more. We went to restaurants, we went to parties, we socialized a lot. Those things are no longer, and that's completely fine. That is how I now have the time to do the things that I'm doing.
So if somebody says, I want Anthony to go out and get me my money, how do they get in touch with you?
The best way is to if you can email me, you can make a phone call. My email is amclaren@rslatelaw.com. Just look up Anthony McLaren, you'll see it come up. And it'll come through, and then I'll probably have a few questions about what's the nature of your dispute, what's the judgment look like, when did you get it, against whom is it against, because we do represent some debtors, as long as it's not a conflict of interest, so we want to make sure we don't have a conflict of interest. But that's how they contact me. That's, as a lawyer, I have a very public profile, so you just, probably the easiest thing for anybody to remember is just remember Anthony McLaren, lawyer climber, and you'll find me. You'll find me.
Okay, Anthony, thanks for coming on.